Hey, what's up, everybody? Tim Albrecht here, and welcome to this week's episode of the Ask a YFP CFP segment of the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast, where we feature questions from you, the YFP community, to be answered by one of YFP Planning's fee-only certified financial planners. Before we jump into today's question, I want to give a shout out to YFP Planning's incredible financial planning team that makes this segment possible. YFP Planning offers fee-only comprehensive financial planning services that are customized to the pharmacy professional. So whether you want to optimize your investing plan, pay off student loans, or simply build a solid financial plan, YFP Planning will help get your income working for you rather than the other way around. You can learn more by visiting yfpplanning.com. Again, that's yfpplanning.com. One last thing, please note that this podcast is intended for educational purposes and should not be considered financial or investment advice, as we do not know the variables to one's personal situation when answering a question. Okay, this week's question comes from the YFP Facebook group, and the question is, I graduated in 2014, about $210,000 in debt, had to switch to an extended repayment plan due to immediate monetary needs. About $2,000 per month of payment was rough. I worked for a big box pharmacy since then. My debt load is down to about $89,000. That being said, I'm just now switching to a nonprofit, and I didn't know if PSLF would even be beneficial at this point or how that would work at this point. Can someone with a little more knowledge provide some insight? Tim Baker, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, when I read through this problem set, my first gut reaction here is probably no to pursue PSLF. And again, this is not advice. I'm looking at this very much in a vacuum. So I would want to kind of, look at some other details in terms of what is the actual compensation and AGI and things like that. But kind of given broad strokes in terms of what I know what pharmacists make, I would say it probably doesn't make sense mathematically or even from a time, term perspective. Because if you think about it, over the last 7 years, this particular borrower has gone from 210 to 89, which is a pretty sizable chunk. Mm-hmm. And then, to revert to a 10-year plan, because it sounds like you would have to start from basically zero out of the 120 payments, that would put you at 17 years. I just don't think that makes any sense at all. That thought or opinion might change again if we were in, if interest rates were like sky high, but they're not. Mm-hmm. So I think I would still want to do the math and kind of look at PSLF, what's the total payment, what's the total amount paid, what would be forgiven over that 10-year timeline. But my thought process is that it probably would make better sense to look at something that's a little bit more aggressive, and or like a refi, or mm-hmm. To try to get these done. If you can do like a 5-year, that puts you out of the loans in 12, which is decent. I mean, that's I like 10 years or less in most cases. And again, sometimes situations are different, coming out, and you said the 2000 was pretty rough, but I would want to know where the loans are at currently, and then also kind of assess a refi and, either slot it for a 5-year or a 7-year if we could swing that, which at 89,000 is maybe a little bit more palatable than, the 210 when you came out. Mm-hmm. So that would be those are my initial broad stroke thoughts, Tim.
So, Tim, great stuff. For folks that are hearing this and wondering, hey, might this be a case where someone might benefit from the new recently released update to PSLF in early October? We talked about previously on an episode of Ask a YFP CFP that we'll link to in the show notes. Might this be an example of someone who could benefit from that expansion and more folks that are open and eligible for payments they didn't think that counted? And I think if we're understanding this question correctly, was working for a for-profit, now working for a nonprofit. And so in that case, they wouldn't necessarily, benefit from that because it wasn't as if they were working for a nonprofit all along. So having that qualified employment for PSLF eligibility is something that did not change with those new rules. Now, if this was someone who was at a nonprofit and then continued in a nonprofit, but was in a repayment plan that wasn't a qualified repayment plan, such as in this case, the extended repayment plan, then that might be a case where someone could have several years of payments that they didn't think counted that ultimately did. But here, since there wasn't qualified employment working for a for-profit, that would be NA. So great stuff. We'll link again to that update talking about some of the PSLF changes if folks are wondering about that. A couple resources I want to point folks to that are navigating through student loans. we've got a great resource, the Pharmacist Ultimate Guide to Paying Back Student Loans. If you go to yourfinancialpharmacist.com/ultimate, we talk through A to Z student loan repayment, forgiveness, non-forgiveness, refi, consolidation, and walk through each of the repayment plans and options. And then also for folks that are evaluating refinance, I think that's something we're going to continue to see come back up in discussion as we approach the end of the administrative forbearance at the end of January 2022. We've got more information on that at yourfinancialpharmacist.com/refinance. Thanks again for listening to this week's episode of the Ask a YFP CFP segment of the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast. If we feature your question on the show, we'll send you a super comfy YFP t-shirt. You can submit your question by sending an email to info@yourfinancialpharmacist.com, or you can record your question by visiting yourfinancialpharmacist.com/ask-YFP. Also, if you don't feel comfortable sharing your name on the episode, you can send or record your question anonymously. Have a great rest of your week.